my name is Remco Havermans. I'm a psychologist, and all psychologists are really interested in the main questions: why do we do what we do? Roughly, most psychologists, at least. And my expertise is in the psychology of eating. So, in all the research that I do, my main question is: why do we eat what we eat? And the answer to that question is very straightforward. Actually, it's very simple. By far, the most important driver of our food choice and food intake is food liking. Generally speaking, we do not eat what we do not like, and we try to eat as much of stuff that we do like, that we derive some pleasure from its consumption. That is true for adults, and is perhaps even more true for children. So that leads to the next questions. What foods do children like, and why do they like these particular foods? And again, we have answers to these questions because of the work by Leanne Birch. And what Leanne Birch found is two things. Firstly, children like sweet foods, and they like sweet stuff by nature. So once they're born, they already have a preference for the sweet taste of sugar. They don't need to learn that. You don't need to teach your children to like sweet stuff. But secondly, for foods that are not as sweet as sugar or not sweet at all, children do need to learn or do need to acquire a liking for those foods. And they acquire this through direct experience. So what do I mean by that? Leanne Birch showed in children, young children, that by repeatedly exposing the child to the taste of a novel food, which could be a novel vegetable, a vegetable that they haven't tried before, or a fruit, such as kiwi, children would grow a liking for that particular food. I say liking, it's more an increase in acceptance. It doesn't happen overnight. So you need to have many repetitions of tastings to achieve this increase in liking for the food. What Leanne Birch argued, is that repeated exposure should comprise actual tasting of the food, not just repeatedly looking at a food. That doesn't work. However, recent research suggests that it might still work in very young children. For instance, if you use a picture book in which you display lots of different vegetables, children do seem to grow a liking, or at least an increased willingness to try the vegetables that were depicted within the picture book. So that's interesting, right? So without tasting, you can still expose your child to vegetables to increase their acceptance of them. Why does this work? Well, the general consensus is that it works particularly for novel foods, meaning that if you grow a certain familiarity for especially its sensory attributes, that makes it less scary to put inside your mouth. So growing a certain familiarity for a food will ensure that you will grow a certain acceptance for that food. Apart from this mere exposure effect, it has also been found that you can classically condition a preference for a certain food or a certain flavor. So this classical conditioning refers to the work of Ivan Petrovich Pavlov. And Pavlov was a physiologist, and in 1904 he received a Nobel Prize for his work on the digestive system. And in his acceptance speech, he doesn't address that work. He mainly addresses this new line of research that he's now doing in St. Petersburg. And that's conditioning, classical conditioning. So what he did in that line of research, he would repeatedly pair a neutral stimulus, for instance, the ringing sound of a bell, with a biologically relevant stimulus, namely food intake, the unconditioned stimulus. And after a while, he observed in his dogs that the dog would not only salivate to the taste of the food, meat powder, but also already to the conditioned stimulus, the neutral stimulus, that predicts the food intake. In this example, it's the ringing sound of a bell. So apparently the dog has associated the sound of the bell with food intake. And this learning of an association is called conditioning, or that's what Pavlov called conditioning. Now, in the 1970s, American psychologists found that they could use a similar paradigm to condition a strong food preference in their animal subjects. So they paired specific flavors with energy repletion, so the intake of lots of calories. And over time, they observed in their animals that the calories would reinforce a strong liking for the flavor that was associated with the energy repletion. These psychologists argued that energy repletion is somehow rewarding. It triggers a reward signal in the brain that is then associated or linked to the flavor of the food that was ingested, leading to that reward signal. Now, Liam Birch took that research from the animal laboratories of the 1970s to the daycare centers, where she tried to condition a strong food preference in young children, 3 to 6-year-olds. And she presented these children with 2 versions of a yogurt drink: a fat-free yogurt drink, relatively low in calories, and a fat-rich yogurt drink, a different flavor, which was relatively energy dense. And she presented she gave these 2 yogurt drinks to 27 children over a period of 6 weeks, repeatedly. Here's what she did and found. So these are the results in this bar plot. So on the outer left, there you see 2 bars, a black one, which is referring in this example to flavor B on the right, and the other bar with the lines in them refers to flavor A. So at the start, just before the conditioning weeks, she would have the children taste and rank order different flavors of yogurt drink, including flavor A and flavor B. And as you can see in the bar plot on the outer left, flavor A and flavor B are almost equally preferred, right? So after 6 weeks of conditioning, you see that both flavors increase in their preference, especially when children were tested when hungry. That's the post-treatment at the center of this plot. I don't see if you can see that. What you can also see is that the black bar, referring to taste B, the fat-rich, the energy-dense flavor, increases more strongly than flavor A over time with repeated exposure. So the calories add something. They add this reward signal, reinforcing a liking for that particular flavor. That relative preference for taste B over taste A is still observed when children were tested when they were full, when they were satiated. And more importantly, that was still observed 8 weeks after the conditioning phase. So calories can indeed, or energy really in foods, can indeed induce strong preference over time with experience in children. This leads to the question, what exactly then is the mechanism behind that, right? So calories apparently can trigger a food reward signal in the brain, but how does that happen? Well, there's current speculation that the gut microbiome is involved in forging that food reward signal in the brain. So everything that we eat ends up in our guts, and there's a lot of microbes that live in our guts and also feed off anything that we eat. Now we know that these microbes metabolize a lot of different stuff. Short-chain fatty acids, but also toxins that we know that can negatively affect our moods, and neurotransmitters such as serotonin and dopamine, which are involved in experiencing reward, experiencing pleasure. So this current speculation, and I have to reiterate, it's still speculation, we don't know whether that's indeed the mechanism, is that specific gut microbes might influence our appetite through, for instance, serotonergic signaling. So Edgar and I are now the co-holders of the Chair Youth Food and Health in Venlo for 1 year, and we've just started with our projects. And I now want to give you a brief overview of the projects that we are planning and that we have just started. So we're currently on the verge of starting a multi-year collaboration with Coccarelli Kids University for Cooking. And Coccarelli is a non-for-profit organization, a foundation here in Venlo, and it specializes in child nutrition education and healthy food innovation for children. So together with Coccarelli, we want to address two main questions. The first one is, what is the optimal way to teach children about healthy foods and how to increase their competence and intention to eat more healthy stuff? And the other question then is, what is the optimal way to develop new healthy foods for children, which I think importantly overlaps with the work that Paula Varela told us about in the previous lecture. So Paula, I would very much like to discuss this further with you in a later occasion, because I think the work is really interesting. Apart from that project that we still need to start, our PhD student Britt van Belkom already started with her project within the chair, supervised by Edgar and me. And the very first study that she is conducting concerns this effect of mere exposure. So she addresses the question whether repeat tasting or repeated exposure to vegetables by young children, toddlers still, increases their knowledge of the vegetables that they taste, and more importantly, increases their vegetable acceptance. If that indeed happens, does this effect extend or generalize to willingness to try as yet unfamiliar vegetables as well? So Britt is fantastic. What she managed to recruit over 20 daycare centers, all in the region of northern Limburg, surrounding Venlo. And she cluster randomized those daycare centers to 3 conditions, 3 separate groups. So there's a control group, there are 2 intervention groups. The second intervention group is called, or the first intervention group is called the exposure group, and the second intervention group is the exposure plus reward group. Now, in this latter intervention group, the children are not just repeatedly exposed to tomato, carrot, cucumber, and paprika, but each time when they actually consume the tomato and carrot and so forth, they can earn a reward, a token, for example, a sticker. And if they then collect a certain amount of stickers, then they will be crowned vegetable king or queen for the whole day. So that's the big reward for these toddlers then. And we expect, especially in this last group, that these children over time will be more willing to try vegetables, and not just the vegetables that they were exposed to during the intervention period, but also other vegetables that they haven't been exposed to. So what Britt is doing currently, she runs a recognition test and a so-called taste test. The recognition test is simply asking the children, the toddlers, to point out, okay, here's a couple of pictures of vegetables. Which one is the tomato? Which one is the carrot? Which one is the cucumber, paprika, etc. In the taste test, we offer different vegetables, some vegetables that they should be familiar with at the end of the intervention period, at least in the 2 intervention groups, and some new vegetables that they haven't been exposed to, and then simply ask them, are you willing to try one of these vegetables? Britt measures the toddlers at the start of the intervention period, at the end, and then 3 months later in a follow-up period, after a 3 months follow-up period. Sorry. That's one study. And she just started this week with that study of collecting the data. We already have some data, but we haven't got enough data to show you any results, any conclusions yet. Perhaps we can show them next year. But apart from that study, Britt is already planning a second study within our PhD project, which concerns something completely different, or pretty different. It concerns flavor preference program. That's how we call it. And here she addresses the question if we can flavor the amniotic fluid through the mother's diet, and if so, if whether the parents then later on can use these flavors to help the child get more used to certain foods, for certain baby foods, for example, healthy baby foods, that is. We wish to recruit 40 pregnant women for this study, and then through an extended period of time during the pregnancy, instruct these women to regularly consume either oregano or garlic in their normal diet. Once they give birth, we then try to collect some amniotic fluid. I'm not sure yet how we are going to do that, but I've heard that it's doable. If we indeed manage to do so, we can then assess the aroma of the amniotic fluid by a sensory panel to see whether we actually achieved in flavoring the amniotic fluid through our dietary intervention. If so, we can also check in the newborns themselves whether they show already an odor preference for either the garlic or the oregano. And 4 or 5 months later, we can test in these infants whether they show a preference or a stronger acceptance for either garlic or oregano flavored vegetable mash or vegetable baby foods. Now, this seems like a wild idea, but there's already some empirical evidence for all this stuff that we are trying to examine here. So we know that it is possible to flavor the amniotic fluid of a pregnant woman through certain dietary interventions. For instance, taking a garlic supplementation, or instructing a mother to drink a glass of carrot juice every day. That works. We also know, sorry, that it then later on can affect the preference of the newborn, of the infant. What is different than in this particular study is what we try to achieve here is to use very specific aromas that you then can use later on as a parent across dishes and across different foods to flavor these dishes and foods. So it gives you much more flexibility in training your child to like different healthy foods. Of course, whether that works is still an open question, and that's the question that we try to address here. So apart from Brit's PhD program, Edgar and I are very interested in studying the role of a healthy gut microbiome in the expression and the development of healthy dietary habits in children, and conversely, how the dietary choices, food choices of children affect the development of the gut microbiome and by extension, health and well-being. And that's my presentation, our presentation, I should say. So thank you very much for listening to our presentations. And if you have any remarks or questions, feel free to ask.